Welcome back, America. Joined now by Dr. Michael Oren from Israel. He used to be Israel's ambassador to the United States. I hope someday he'll be their ambassador to the United Nations. He joins me this morning, and I don't know if I can talk to him. Twitter banned him for a while, so I don't know if he's radioactive. What was that all about, Michael Oren, getting tossed off of Twitter?
They suspended me. They suspended me, Hugh, and they erased thousands and thousands of followers. So if any of your listeners want to right that wrong, they can follow me on Twitter. I wrote to them. They didn't respond, not for the first articles begin to come out in the American press. Then they got back to me within the hour and apologized for putting it in spam. That was their excuse. I think it had to do with a series of tweets that I made last December after the New York Times twice described BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions, an organization that aspires to destroy the state of Israel, an anti-Semitic organization. New York Times described it as an organization that seeks to end Israel's occupation of the West Bank, which was a lie. It was a deliberate lie. And I said of the New York Times that they cannot condemn anti-Semitism on one hand and then whitewash it with the other. And I have a sense that triggered it.
Now, when you say erase followers, I'm looking at your Twitter feed, you have 25,000 followers. You were much higher than that. How many did they erase?
They erased them all. That's what's come back in the last couple of days. And
that's amazing. Can't they find the people that were following you and put them back?
I had enough trouble getting them to unsuspend my account.
Did they ever give you? I always think when that happens, it's some 22-year-old goofy intern who just got picked up at Twitter because they're the nephew of somebody who invested early, and they don't know anything about nothing, and so they don't like someone and they erase them. Did they send you a nice letter at least?
A prosaic letter, a bland letter, and they said that my account had been accidentally put into spam.
Oh my gosh!
Okay.
All right.
Really a minor apology, but
all right.
But it reached the press. It went around the world, and then quickly they.
It's a moron's move. Okay, let's get to the government. It appears from the Times of Israel this morning that all the laws that need passing are being passed and the government will stand up. Is that your view?
That is the view. And over the last couple of weeks, I've talked about whether the High Court would approve changes in Israel's basic laws. We don't have a constitution. Like Great Britain, we have a collection of basic laws which set out how governments are formed, how they're elected, how long they stay in office. And you had to change a whole series of laws in order to get a government which basically has two prime ministers on a rotational basis. It has the largest number of ministers in Israeli history and vice ministers. And half the ministers are answerable to one prime minister, and other half of the ministers are answerable to another prime minister. And basically freezes legislation for a half a year for the coronavirus, no high-level appointments. Imagine the White House saying to Congress, you can't pass legislation for half a year. That would require a major constitutional change in the United States as well. I was questioning whether the Supreme Court, which has been a very activist Supreme Court, would step up and say, no, you can't change all these basic laws overnight. But then I also said that the Supreme Court was afraid. They were afraid that they become too activist, and that the Knesset would then turn to the Supreme Court and say, you weren't elected, we're the sovereign, you're not, and we're going to override a Supreme Court decision. Well, the Supreme Court, I think, blinked. And what happened is they said, well, we're not going to interfere. There are a lot of questions here, but we're not going to interfere. And the legislation was passed last night, changes to the basic law, May 13th, another couple of days, and Israel will finally have, after a very long break, we'll finally have a government.
So tell me about the security situation on 75 years after victory in Europe, 75 years after the last camp was liberated. Where is Israel today in terms of its security?
I look back to May 8th, 1945, VE Day. My father we still have at home, my parents' home, the flyers that were dropped by B-17 bombers over Europe saying, Nazis quit. That was the headline.
Oh, wow.
And all the world was dancing. All the world was dancing, except for one man, David Ben-Gurion, who was the future prime minister of Israel, our founding father, who wrote in his diary, it's very sad. It's sad because a third of the world's Jews had been killed and massacred by the Nazis. Now, who on May 8th would think that 3 years after that, almost to the day, May 14th, 1948, a sovereign Jewish state would be created in the state of Israel? And it would defend itself against invasions. It would absorb hundreds of thousands, millions of refugees. It would create a democracy in the Middle East. It would create a thriving, flourishing intellectual and technological life. And it's amazing when you look from a historical perspective what this state has done. And today, Israel faces no conventional threats. We've had peace with Egypt, peace with Jordan. The Syrians are busy elsewhere. Our biggest threat is still terror in the form of Hezbollah and Hamas, and Iran, and Iran's nuclear project. So we can't, rest on any laurels. And there was a rocket fired the other night from Gaza, for example. We still have to deal with this. But from an historical perspective, this is nothing short of probably the greatest story in modern history.
You're right. I mean, it's as we celebrate VE Day tomorrow, we also have to celebrate that as night follows day and as day follows night, Israel arose from the ashes, and that's a great thing. Dr. Michael Oren, you can follow him on Twitter, and you should. Dr. Michael Oren. Dr. Michael Oren. Get him back his hundreds of thousands, and I hope we see you in Turtle Bay soon, Michael Oren.